Hello. Hello, everybody. Good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. It's almost full moon. We're in the middle of the Rinchen Trengwa retreat here at Taramandala, and I think we did melody number 37 today. Yes, that many melodies in this practice. It's really amazing. It's so beautiful, and the richness of this cultural tradition of Machi Glapchen is in the Rinchen Trengwa, and we're learning it. And I can't imagine we'll ever really be able to do it, but there's some pretty amazing people attending, and I think they'll be able to remember all these melodies. I definitely won't. So anyway. I am with you now, and let's raise bodhicitta. This is the heartful thought toward practicing and learning for the benefit of all beings. Thank you. This full moon is Machi Glapchen's birthday, and we will be doing the feast of the Tsokle Rinchen Trengwa, which means the tsoks, the gatherings, the feasts of the garland of jewels. And I really get the name now, because it's really one sok after another in this practice. We're on page we're in 3-something now, 321, and there's been so many different soaks in it. So we'll be doing the whole thing on the 29th, and it will be the first time that we live webcast a whole day from Taramandala. We got good internet maybe about 6 months ago, and we've been building toward this moment when we can actually live webcast. And so this will be the first trial of that. So I hope lots of you can drop in during the day. You can drop in and out as it works for you and your schedule and your day. So tonight I'm talking about the history of Tantra, and then distinguishing it from what is being taught in this country as Neo-Tantra. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the dakinis. So Tantra came into Buddhism about 700, at least that's when most historical records start to really feel the presence of it. It very definitely has roots earlier. In fact, they found about 10 years ago, they found a capital, the capital of a column, that said Dakini school on it in India. So, and it was from the 2nd century. So we don't really know when it all came together in India, but it came together in a way that has been documented in the 8th century. So Buddhism had already been going then at that time for about 1200 years. So Buddhism was well underway, and the early Sutric period had happened, and then the Mahayana period began around the turn of the millennium. And then this was the next big wave, the 3rd wave of the development of Buddhism. And it was this wave that went to Tibet, because it wasn't until the 8th century that Buddhism actually went to Tibet. And that's why we have the Vajrayana in Tibet. And that's why it is the Buddhism that went to Tibet. Besides the fact that I think it's very sort of cogent, workable with the Tibetan psyche, because of all the energy in it, all the mantras, all the rituals, and so on. But in any case, let's kind of look at what happened. Like, what is this Tantra, and where did it come from? So the actual sources of Tantra are still being debated by scholars. Some feel it has roots in Shaivism, Shivite tradition in India, and some from the matrifocal pre-Aryan tradition, and it's probably a mixture of those two. One of the things that's interesting to me in the advent of Tantra in Buddhism is that there's suddenly a presence of the sacred feminine, and there's actually female Buddhas. And there's also yoginis, and there's women teachers, and there's sacred sexuality, and there's poetry, and there's mantras, and there's yoga, and there's sadhana. So it was a big change. It was a big influence that occurred. But for me, what's always been interesting, because I've always been interested in the feminine and what that means and how that manifests, particularly in Vajrayana Buddhism, is that it was really at that point that we really start to have a presence of the sacred feminine in Buddhism. We had it before, earlier in nuns, and the Buddha did teach women. There's a lot of stories about his interactions with women, and some of his earliest patrons were women. But it wasn't until the Mahayana period, around the turn of the millennium, that we get the feminine principle in the form of Prajnaparamita, the Great Mother, who's the mother of all the Buddhas. And then in the tantric period, it sort of multiplies, and suddenly there's a Tara, there's Vajrayogini, there's Virkuti, there's all kinds of different female deities and female gurus. So what happened with Tantra, it seems to be what happened is it was almost like a kind of revolution within the lay community, the non-monastic community of Buddhists. And they sort of rose up, and there was at that point, the monastic elite was kind of like a priest elite. They had begun to own things. They owned animals. They owned property. They were interacting with the government. There was a sort of like almost like a class of monk priests, you could say, and Buddhism had really sort of gone into their hands, and so Tantra came up as like a kind of revolutionary reaction to that from the lay community, which I think is interesting also in terms of us now, because we are mostly non-monastics who are practicing in the West in general. There's very few monastics who are practicing Buddhism in the West. So we are kind of naturally this lay community as practitioners. And so what came in with Tantra were what's called sadhanas. Sadhana is a practice that usually involves a mandala and a deity. Sometimes a single deity, sometimes 5 in the center of the mandala, as I teach the mandala, and then there can be hundreds of deities within the mandala. So within a sadhana, you actually go through an entire lifetime. You could say you die as an individual in the beginning. You dissolve into emptiness, and then you rest in emptiness, and then from emptiness we generate our being as a deity through sound. Sound is the primary force, sound and light, that creates the deity. So it's something called a seed syllable. So that process of sounding the seed syllable is like the conception, if we think of this as a lifetime. So we come out of the bardo, out of emptiness, and then we are conceived in the seed syllable. And then the pregnancy is like the articulation of the visualization of the deities in the mandala. That articulation continues, until it's complete, and the complexity of the mandala is dependent on how long that takes. Sometimes practices are very simple. There's a one deity, like the Tara practice that we do at Tara Mandala. It's just Tara in the mandala, in the center of the mandala. But in any case, there's this process of creation. It is actually called the creation stage, or the arising stage. And then there's the moment of bringing in the energy of the wisdom beings. And that's kind of like, if we think about the mother, she conceives this physical being in her womb, but that being doesn't have a consciousness in it. And so then at a certain point, the consciousness comes into that fertilized egg, and then it becomes a being. And so that's the moment of the wisdom beings coming into the pledge beings, or the beings that we've created in our mind with the visualization. And so then you're living the life. Then you are the deity, and then the kind of key moment or core of that period is the mantra recitation, in which the mantra, which is usually in the heart of the deity, is spinning, and it's sending light both up to all the wisdom beings, drawing their wisdom down, and then going out to sentient beings and helping them. And so that's the lifetime of the deity. And then in the end, the deity dissolves, and dissolves back into that seed syllable in the heart of the deity, and then into emptiness, which is the death. So that's a very quick journey through a sadhana. And then there's always the raising of bodhicitta in the beginning, the dedication of merit at the end, and so on. So it's sort of sandwiched with refuge and bodhicitta in the beginning, and then dedication at the end. So that's a core of what a tantric practice would be. And so these can be very elaborate or fairly simple. And the deity in the lower tantras is seen to be external. For example, in the Kriya tantras, which are the lowest level of tantra, the deity is seen to be external, in front of you, and your relationship with the deity is that of a supplicant to a king or a queen. And so it's very much you supplicating something superior and external to you. As you move through the different tantras, and depending on the schools that you are, which tradition you're practicing in, there can be 4 different levels or 9 different levels. In what I teach, there's 9 different levels in the Nyingma tradition. So as you go higher in the tantras, the deity becomes more innate, so that you're seeing yourself as the deity. And then eventually, when you get to the highest level, the 9th dhyana, there is no deity. Everything is the mandala, and everything is perfection. And then also, when you get to those higher stages, you're going more into what's called the perfection stage, which is after that arising or creation stage, into the yogas and working with energy. And that's in our tradition where you would work with the sexual practices, and also yoga, tsalong, and so on. And so Neo-Tantra, just to make that distinction, has pulled out a little piece at the end of a sadhana at a very high level, where you would actually work with a partner and work with sexuality as a way to work with the energy that's developed in and sort of been cultivated through the creation stage. And so what's happened now in America and in Europe and other places is that when you say the word tantra, people think sex. Everybody loves sex. It's a very popular subject, and it's very saleable. But it's not really the meaning of Tantra. So it's kind of like maybe just eating the butter and not eating the toast and the rest of your breakfast, or maybe just the jam or something like that. It's kind of taking a piece that's sweet, and there's a obvious interest in it, and it's seductive and so on. But the whole idea of Tantra is that we have a different relationship with our world. And so it has to do with our senses. And so normally, or in early Buddhism, the senses were considered to be avenues for distraction and avenues that lead to clinging and samsara, which is the opposite of nirvana. And so that problem of trying to get out of samsara and into nirvana is flipped in the tantric tradition to be that we want to be work with and transform those poisons that we would have renounced earlier into wisdom. And the way that's done is through the senses. And that's why sexuality is also tied to it. But if you look right now, like everyone who's there, like look right now, I'm looking outside here, I'm seeing trees. Our trees have not yet budded. We don't have leaves yet. So what if I am, instead of seeing those as objective things like the trees, what if I am in union with those trees? I'm in an experience of of non-duality with that amazing tree, and I can begin to feel the sap running through it, and I can feel that in my heart. I'm having a completely different experience of that tree than just looking at it as an object. And so this can be done with all of the senses. Let's say I'm hearing a sound. It could be the sound of a bird, or the sound of traffic, the sound of the hum on an airplane. What if instead of thinking of it as a noise, what if I thought of it as a sound? And then what if I went into that sound and just was with that sound in a non-dual way? Maybe you have some sounds around you and you can try this. So it's the same with taste. That's why we have all these feasts in Vajrayana, because we work with the senses. So when you eat something, normally you're like, okay, I'm eating my banana because it has these vitamins in it, et cetera, et cetera. I have these concepts. Oh, this isn't really ripe, or it's too ripe, or this is just perfect, whatever. I'm not really in that taste of the banana. I'm conceptualizing, and I'm liking it, or I'm disliking it. And so if I'm really just in that taste in a non-dual way, then it's a liberating experience. And so that's how in Tantra, in Vajrayana, we find liberation with our senses. And so that's how it's tied to sexuality, because in sexuality or sexual experience, what's happening? You have taste, you have touch, you have sight, you have smell, and so on. You have all the senses, right? Probably as active as they ever are. Like, when are our senses more active than when we're together with a lover? We're so awake and we're present. We're not on our phone. We're actually there, and if we can be more there, then it can be a really liberating experience because all the senses are engaged. And that's why the image of Yabyum, or the sacred sexual union, is used in Vajrayana because of that. Like what other experience do we have as human beings in which our senses are that activated and in which we are that present potentially? Now, the way Neo-Tantra is taught is it's kind of pulls out one thing out, which is, I'm not saying Neo-Tantra isn't valid, but it's really sort of like pulling a little piece out of this amazing process, which is a path, and saying, hey, do this and, your sex is going to be better. That's fine, I mean, I honestly am not against that, but I'm just making a distinction that I think is an important distinction, because Tantra is getting a certain name, and it's not really what Tantra is. And so we do need to distinguish between Tantra and Neo-Tantra. So that's the distinction. And so the Tantric tradition developed in India in the 8th century or earlier and became manifest in the 8th century. And then it actually became the dominant form of Buddhism that was practiced in India. The Pala kings, which were a group of kings that ruled from the 8th to 12th century, practiced it. They practiced Tantric Buddhism. So Tantric Buddhism was the sort of state religion, you could say, of India during that period. And then it was that time, that period, that it went to Tibet. And so we inherited it, or are inheriting it, from Tibet in the West, which is actually, to me, very interesting that here we are, we're not India, we're not Tibet, we're not Asia, but somehow we're interested in this enough to follow it and practice it. And so it will be interesting to see what happens in our generation, in our time, and the generations that follow, taking this, to me, what's really such a gem. I mean, to me, Vajrayana is so profound. It's just so profound. Also, it works with the feminine, with the masculine, with Yabyum, and there's gender fluidity in Vajrayana, where everyone sees themselves as a male or a female or both simultaneously in their practice. I've done male deities, I've done female deities, I've done Yabyum deities, and a male would do the same thing. So we work with gender energies, but it's not fixated. We can feel ourselves as both and not feel like that's a problem. Like, oh, am I going to lose my femininity if I see myself as a male deity, or am I going to lose my masculinity if I see myself as a Dakini? No, we're going to bring forth that aspect of the psyche, which, I'm very interested in Jungian psychology, and he talks a lot about the anima and the animus, and that need to have the balance of both those. Women need the masculine, men need the feminine, and whatever gender you identify with, or if you don't identify as either, still those energies are at play in the world, and we're working with them. So that is a bit of an arc historically of Tantra, and here we are. It died out in India in the 12th century. It went on in Tibet. It went on in Japan. But here we are in the 21st century, and we're inheriting this. And personally, I feel responsible. I feel like I'm a keeper of this. I don't think parent would be the right word, but responsible caretaker maybe would be good. Hopefully responsible. I am very traditional. I practice very traditionally, but I'm also interested in the application of these things in a wider context, and how we bring this wisdom to the whole world. And that's really what my new book, Wisdom Rising, Journey into the Mandala of the Empowered Feminine, is about. Is okay, so we've got this fairly esoteric jewel from Tibet, which I've now studied almost 50 years. And how do we be good caretakers of that and not pollute it and not harm it, and yet make it so that it can help in the entire world situation that we're in right now. And that's really what I've tried to do with this book, is pull that out and then take it into our current situation in the world. So within this context, I'll just touch a little bit on the dakinis here for a minute, is the feminine, as I said. And the form of the feminine that stands out for me in Vajrayana is the dakinis. And I always loved them. As soon as I heard about them, I was like, yes, I can do this. Because I was kind of wild, as a youth. Still a little wild. I think we should all be a little wild, right? Don't you? Anyway, so the dakinis are the wild and the undomesticated feminine, and they're wise. They're not just like, kind of, wild women in the woods or something like that. They embody the undomesticated feminine, and they embody wisdom, but they're not cut off from their sexuality. They're not cut off from their independence. I think that's something that I really love about them. Although they do connect, with their consorts and so on, they're whole unto themselves. And they carry, in the crook of the left arm, they carry the Khatvanga staff. And it goes all the way up. My son actually gave me one when my husband died. He gave me a Khatvanga. And it symbolizes the inner consort. And so I love that idea that we can be self-seeding, that we can hold our own masculine as women. And of course, if you're a male identifying as a dakini, you're holding your own masculine there too. But the male deities also have this Khatvanga, and that's their inner female consort. So the dakinis dance also, which is something else that I love to do, and I love about them that they're not just sitting there. They're active, and there's 4 main activities that they do. One is they pacify what needs to be pacified. They calm things down. And then they enrich what needs to be enriched. They create prosperity and a sense of juiciness, richness as the second one. Increase. And then the third one is magnetizing. So they're able to magnetize with power that which needs to be magnetized. And then the fourth one is to subdue or to destroy what needs to be destroyed. And you might think, oh, that sounds scary. We should never destroy. But we do need to destroy. When you build something, usually you need to destroy something to build something new. So, and sometimes I think that we don't do enough of that cutting. I'm thinking about women. We need to cut, and sometimes we hold on to things too long. So those are the 4 activities: pacifying, increase, magnetizing, and subduing or destroying. And so those are the activities of the dakinis. And that's another thing I've been noticing in this Rinchen Trengwa, is it's all about the 5 dakinis. You just keep going back to them throughout this 300-page text. To me, that's so refreshing that we can have female energy that's spiritual. It's also she is also sexual. That she's wise. She's dancing. She's empowered. She's whole unto herself, and yet she's able to couple. She's able to have a consort, and she's wearing tiger skins and lion skins, and that's her fearlessness. She's a lot of symbolic objects and so on that she holds. She holds this hooked knife in her raised right hand, and it cuts through subject-object fixation. And then in her left hand, at her heart, she's holding a skull cup, which symbolizes impermanence, right? Some point where all of our skulls could become cups. And this is from the charnel grounds in India. And then within that is the blood of transformation, of karmic history. You know how you hold things in your bloodline? When you think about, your family demons and your family allies and so on, and physically we get genetic diseases, and we have this whole karmic lineage. So she's turned that into nectar. And so the image of the Dakini I talk about a lot. In fact, this book, Women of Wisdom, yes, Women of Wisdom had it, but my new book, I realized all of my books have the name wisdom in it. The first one's Women of Wisdom, and then second one's Feeding Your Demons, Ancient Wisdom for Resolving Inner Conflict, and now Wisdom Rising. So I think I'm kind of hung up on wisdom. But anyway, wisdom is something we need. We need it in the world today. I was struck by Marcon from France, and just wishing we could. Today I was having this fantasy. Couldn't we kidnap him and he could be our president? we just want to let him go back to France. Keep him and Brigitte here. But anyway, we need wisdom, and in this book I talk a lot about the dakinis and then the 5 different families of dakinis, and you can find yourself in one of these families or in several of them. And then I teach the mandala of the 5 dakinis, or I give you actually that practice, which I'll also be giving on this tour. And then we've created an online course for this book, and that will be something amazing with hours of teachings and practices and so on that I've created for those of you that maybe can't come to events. And so, so I think that's what I want to talk about tonight: Tantra, Neo-Tantra, and the dakinis. It's been lovely to be with you, and we're building up toward the big day, which is May 1st, the publication day of this book. And it's been amazing, the support that we've had so far with the book. It's now #1 on Amazon pre-release or new releases. It hasn't been released yet within this category of Buddhism. So it's I feel like this book has its destiny. It's kind of like, when you have a child grows up, and then the child goes into the world and does their life and has their life. So the publication is the birth, really, of the book, and then there'll be a whole process of it growing up and finding its own life. I still have people with Women of Wisdom saying, I just read your book. It's so important to me. It's changed my life. It's the only way I could have ever gotten into Buddhism was through that book. And so it's a beautiful thing, and it's a very hard thing to write a book. Maybe there's some people it's easy for, but not me. I struggled. It's really maybe not quite as hard as having a baby, but almost. So anyway, lots of love to you all, and let's dedicate the merit of our time together tonight. And that means we offer out any energy that we've generated through the practice. We offer that out to all beings everywhere. Any positive energy. Thanks, everybody. Lots of love. Bye for now.